Hello, welcome everyone to the At-Home Residential EVs webinar. Thank you for joining this evening. My name is Courtney Chin. I'm the Residential Energy Specialist for Arlington County. We also have Jenna Peabody from the AIR team on today. This is the first webinar in the Think Big EV Road Trip Virtual Series hosted by the Arlington Initiative to Rethink Energy, or AIR team within Arlington County. Tonight's webinar will be focused on residential electric vehicles, and we have three amazing speakers to share their EV knowledge with you. As a reminder, this event will be recorded and later published to the AIR webpage and shared with all attendees via email. Attendees will also receive the slides that will be presented and some additional resources related to owning and driving an EV. Attendees will have their microphones and cameras off during this webinar, but please do type in questions for the speakers into the Q&A, which can be found at the top of your team's screen. If you have any technical difficulties, please use the chat section to relay your issue, and our team will do their best to help. I mentioned we have three amazing speakers: Ron Kaltenbaugh from the Electric Vehicle Association of Greater Washington, D.C., Joy Bickelhaupt, an Arlington resident and EV owner, and Justin Wilt, Arlington resident, EV owner, and e-bike owner. To get us started tonight, I will hand it over to Ron.
Thanks, Courtney. So I'm going to talk about and do basically about a 10-minute EV 101, just to set some ground baseline for folks and get people used to some of the terminology you'll hear. And hopefully this will answer some of your initial questions. Next slide, please. So I've got a number of things to talk about, and this is kind of the overview. And so let's just jump right into the first slide content. Next slide. Okay, so we all hear the terms electric vehicle or electrified vehicle, and these terms are interesting in that, first off, there's no set definition for these. There are conventions people tend to use, but typically when we say electrified vehicles, we're looking at one of three vehicle types. Hybrid, which some of you may have. This is usually a gasoline vehicle with a small electric motor and a small battery. That electric motor is there just to make the car a little more efficient, maybe a little smaller engine, and just make it get a higher MPG, but there's no plug. Then we get into what are typically electric vehicles. And so there's plug-in hybrids, again, usually a gasoline engine, this time a larger battery and a plug. And these cars can go some distance on electric only, and then have a gas engine to take over after that. And lastly, we have full electric vehicles, which have only electric motor and batteries and no internal combustion engine whatsoever. So these are the kinds of vehicles. If you hear a manufacturer talk about electrified vehicles, they're probably including hybrids. If they say electric, they're probably not, but that's not always the case. That's just generally how it works. Next slide, please. One of the interesting aspects of all of these vehicles is regenerative braking. So ICE cars, or internal combustion engine, are not very efficient in a lot of ways. And one of those ways is with braking, because when you brake in a traditional car, you're using friction to stop the car, and all that energy gets lost. It goes into heat in the brake pads and things like that. But in any kind of electric vehicle, typically that is captured because the electric motor runs in reverse and becomes a generator and puts that energy back into the batteries. This is one of the efficiency things around EVs. And it also means that your brake pads last a lot longer, and so you have less brake maintenance. So moving on to the next slide, we're going to talk about some other benefits around EVs. One of them that anybody who's driven an EV for any time at all will immediately recognize is the lower fuel costs. Now, these numbers are vary greatly depending on where you're at, and because the price of things vary, and also over time. But generally in the EV space, your cost if you're charging from home, your cost for running your car is about 3 or 4 cents per mile. In some states with higher electricity costs, that might be a little higher, but that's generally what it is. Gasoline is around 5 to 30 cents per mile, but at times that can go way higher because gasoline is very volatile in cost. The bottom line is fuel costs for an EV is much lower per miles driven than a gasoline or even a diesel vehicle. Other benefits are around fumes. So there's no toxic gasoline fumes, no smelly stops at gas stations and things like that, which is a great, none of us like those fumes, and it's a great health benefit. I already mentioned a little bit about maintenance. So you have fewer brake checks and brake work, but you also don't have things like you don't have to do tune-ups, oil changes, muffler replacements, things like that. Your main maintenance are tire rotations, general brake checks, and washer fluid. There's not a whole lot else to worry about under normal maintenance items. Another great thing about EVs is the acceleration. So this can be a fun thing, and a lot of people who like fast sports cars like this, but it can also be a safety advantage. EVs have the torque curve is a flat line. So the torque curve on a car is how fast the torque or the turning force revs up, and it really controls how fast a car can accelerate. So if you're merging onto the beltway, for example, in an EV, it's much easier to get into that narrow window in a busy time than it is in most gasoline cars. EVs are cleaner, and I'll talk about more about that later, and mostly come from US generated electricity with just a little bit of Canadian hydro in the United States. So you're powering them with local electrons. Let's move on to charging. So there are 3 levels of charging, level 1, 2, and 3. And these are based on the amount of power, amount of electricity that goes to the vehicle. Level 1 is anything using a regular 110 outlet. This is going to get you between 3 and 5 miles of range per hour, which is not a lot, but if your commute's short, you can easily, charge your EV overnight. Or let's say you go to the beach for the weekend and you're at an Airbnb and there's an outlet outside where you park your car, plug the car in, and the car can charge, over the weekend because you're at the beach and not using it. So there are places where level 1 is perfectly valid and perfectly useful and is an option. Level 2 is where most charging occurs, and this is what often referred to as a dryer circuit. It's going to be a 240 circuit that, depending on the number of amps, will get you between 12 and 46 miles of range per hour. Most cars are in the 25 to 35 range. This is plenty of juice to charge up a car, most of any EV overnight, even if it's down to empty. And like I said, it's where most charging occurs. And then there's DC fast charging. And this is where the plug types vary across cars. And this is high voltage DC connector, mainly used for travel and for fast charging at commercial stations, where you're going to get between 50 and 200 miles in 30 minutes or less, depending on the vehicle. So there's a lot of variety in this one. So next 2 slides, I have some maps. And so many of you may remember that Volkswagen got into trouble several years ago with their Dieselgate scandal. They got caught cheating on emissions tests, had to pay some serious penalties. One of the many penalties they ended up having to pay was they were required to invest $2 billion in the US in EV charging over 10 years. And as of this past May, this map here shows their network where they have fast chargers at over 800 locations and over 3,500 of them. And you can see, based on the map there, they're laid out along major corridors and meant for travel. There's other aspects of their charging implementation they've done, but this is just one of the ones that helps with long distance travel. The next slide shows another network for fast charging, and this is Tesla's supercharger network. Tesla, from the early days, started deploying chargers. They were at the time, the only vehicle manufacturer doing that, and they have by far the largest network of anybody in this space. Their network is worldwide, but this shows North America, where they have over 5,000 locations worldwide and approaching 2,000 in the US, with as of May, over 17,000 chargers. The thing about the Tesla network is that tends to be many more stations per location, and their reliability is industry leading. But the great news here is that Tesla is opening up this network to non-Tesla vehicles. So this will be available to other brands shortly. So moving on, one of the benefits around, I mentioned in the opening slide there, was around EVs getting cleaner. So this map from the Union of Concerned Scientists shows the miles per gallon that a gasoline car would need to get to be as clean as an EV charged from the grid. You can see there, the light blue is above 50 miles per gallon. Everything else is below that. Well, if we move to the next slide, which is 4 years later in 2018, we can see that almost the entire map is above 50 miles per gallon. And unfortunately, I don't have a more current map here. So 5 years later, these numbers will be just so much higher. The key here is that as the grid gets cleaner, your EV gets cleaner. So the EV you bought 3 years ago is cleaner than it was when you bought it. So that's a great story for helping out with pollution and helping out with the climate. Winding down here, the last thing I want to talk about, next to last thing I should say, is around health benefits. The American Lung Association did a study about a year ago, maybe 18 months ago, looking at the benefits from electrifying transportation and the electric grid. And they found over $1 trillion in public health benefits, dollar-wise, by 2050 if we do this work. That didn't even count the benefit and enrichment in people's lives from not having to breathe unhealthy air and having less asthma attacks and the like. So there are real quality of life benefits here, but also real financial benefits as well. And my last slide, I just want to highlight my group, EVADC. We are an all-volunteer group. We put out a number of materials. You'll get these slides, so you'll see these links there. I want to highlight two. One is that we have our EV info sheet, which has, we put out at least once a year with all the current models. And we also have, if we don't answer your questions tonight, we do a regular first Wednesday of the month call called Ask an EV Owner. And you'll be able to, you think about a question next week or a month from now, you decide to get serious and want to ask more questions, that's available to you, and you'll get this information when you get the slides later on. So that's what I have for so far, and I'll turn it back to Courtney for our next speaker.
Thank you, Ron. And just like he said, we will share that link to the Ask an EV Owner monthly presentation that will be available for people to join on our AIR webpage. Next up, we have lessons from an EV driver focusing on multifamily, Joy Bickelhaupt.
Thank you. Thanks a lot. Ron, that was really interesting. I appreciated all that information. Some of that I was aware of, but some of it was new to me. There's always something to learn when it comes to electric vehicles and the future of that. So it's nice to meet everyone, or not meet, but to see everyone online and all of the EV enthusiasts joining us for this conversation. I am super excited to talk about it. Any opportunity I have to talk about electric vehicles, I am here for it. So nice to see you all with us. Next slide, please. So this is me and my Joy Jet. This is my dream car, my 2018 pre-owned Tesla Model 3 long range, all-wheel drive, blue exterior, black interior with chrome trim. This is my starter Tesla because I still have my sights set on the Model Y when the time is right. But and around 2007 or 2008, I was at work reading the news in the morning before getting started, and I learned about this company that had created an electric battery-powered sports car that was faster than a Mustang, Corvette, and I was hooked from the beginning. I'm from a small town in Nevada and grew up with muscle cars. And, I always try to be a good steward of the planet and environmentalist. And so when I learned about the Tesla Motor Company, I had followed it ever since. And I had always dreamed of owning a Tesla. And then in I guess it was probably 2017 or 18, I rented my first Tesla on a road trip to Lake Anna. If you haven't heard of Turo, Turo, that's the site that I used to rent the Tesla for the weekend. And I tell you, after that weekend, my interest in Tesla just increased. So I had my sights set on it, and just last May, I finally purchased it and have been loving it ever since. So highly recommend. If I assume you guys are all here to learn more about EV charging, and if you haven't tried it, highly recommend. Whether it's a Tesla or another EV, I hear that there are just so many to choose from. So Turo is a good option for you to try it out. Thanks. So, well, I guess the connection of the video isn't loading well, but this video is one of the reasons that I purchased the Tesla. So I am changing lanes, hands-free, on my way to Annapolis Junction, Maryland in the morning for work. Now, I do not drive hands-free the whole time, but in those long stretches on the BW Parkway, I, set it to auto drive and try it out. I'm very cautious. I have my hand on the wheel. The car is very smart, so it'll alert you if you are not paying attention. So it'll flash on the screen, it'll step on the brake if it thinks you're not paying attention. So why did I buy an EV? This is one of the reasons. It's the most fun I've ever had driving a car, and I still enjoy driving it to this day. Anytime a friend or family, they're like, hey, let's go downtown or let's go here or there, I offer to drive. As I mentioned, I learned about Tesla in 2008, and I finally made my purchase last year. I'm loving it. Is it perfect? Definitely not. It's the closest version of a perfect car that I can imagine for me, for my lifestyle. I really enjoy it. And, I appreciate all of the components of it being gas-free. There's no emissions. There's really no maintenance for the car. There's no emissions inspections. The only thing I have to do is make sure the windshield wiper fluid is full and maybe rotate my tires once in a while, which I still haven't done yet. So, if nothing else, it's the most fun to drive. So, next slide. All right, so what's it like owning an EV in a multifamily community? I live in Fairlington, the historic district of Fairlington. We have about 3,000 or so units in Fairlington, and I live in a court. It's a pretty big court. There's Teslas in the neighborhood, but it takes some planning. What are the pros and cons? So right now, there are just enough chargers in the neighborhood that I'm not really struggling to charge. There's one at the Safeway across the street. There's one in the Fairlington Villages when I visit my auntie over there. There's one near the Fairlington Community Center I can plug in and walk home, walk a couple blocks away. So I don't yet have one installed in my, my parking spot, but there's access. There's interest from neighbors. People are asking when we can start installing EV chargers in Fairlington. I live in the Glen, which is one of the smaller associations within the broader community of Fairlington. There are other associations, the Meadows, the Arbor, the Commons. They've begun installing EV chargers in their association already. So a couple of years, well, I guess it was last year, I joined the EV committee for our HOA, which I'll get into in a minute. And we're, I think, on the precipice of installing an EV charger, a community charger for the association. So it's happening in a multifamily area. And I do think there's potential, great potential to expand EV chargers in multifamily units. So what are the cons? I have a reserved spot in my court, but I can't directly connect to my house without about a $5,000 to $6,000 investment. I did recently renovate my basement, so I upgraded my electrical panel, which would be one of the things you need to do if you're charging at home and your panel isn't sufficient to provide the power. I upgraded the panel, but then an electrician would need to run conduit from my panel outside my house underground to my spot, where I would then install a Tesla pedestal charger, for example. So it's not ideal. If you have a single family home, though, you're in good shape. You really don't have much to worry about. You can install an extension cord, make sure that your panel's up to the right grade. You can charge your car. If you're not a planner, it becomes a little bit of a paradigm shift. You have to become a planner if you don't have a charger at home. Choosing your destination in proximity to chargers. You may have to walk a couple blocks, go to a particular garage where one is located. But fortunately, so far in Arlington County, and I know more are coming, I can go to numerous neighborhoods in Arlington and be able to charge. Ballston has chargers. Shirlington has, I think, 4 or 5 chargers. Pentagon City, I just discovered recently, has chargers in their garage. Clarendon has a Tesla supercharger. Springfield Mall is another supercharger location, and of course the Wharf. There are numerous other locations where you can charge. There are apps for it. The Tesla itself shows you where the chargers are, so you can direct yourself to it, but you kind of have to plan ahead. For example, tomorrow I'm heading back to Annapolis to work. So tonight I'll make sure I'm charged up. I may have to hop over to the supercharger. I can leave it in overnight at one of the local slow chargers, and then I'll be ready in the morning. But it takes some planning. It's a paradigm shift. You have to really think about, what you're doing and where you're going. I would say if you don't have one at home, you definitely need to be thinking about it more than you would with an ICE vehicle. But to me, it's worth it. It's not too much of an inconvenience for me personally. I just love it so much. It's worth it. So those are some of the pros and cons. But I do think installing, and I've seen it, installing EV chargers in multifamily units is feasible, possible, and it's happening. Next slide. So let's say you live in a condo or you live in an association. How can you get EV chargers installed in your community? So step 1 is to get involved. Somebody's got to take action. It's not an easy task, but it is achievable. So if you have an HOA, I assume you would if you're an owner in a condo or multifamily unit. Start the conversation, engage with your neighbors, start to take action and initiate interest, and communicate that interest at board meetings. You got to show up. Build a team. Get with your neighbors who are also interested, get them to, start a small committee, start taking surveys. Again, spreading the word, it's an education, it's a learning curve. So if you have a team of people to work together to spread the word, that'll help a lot. Collect your data. Big projects are never successful if they're in the dark. So the first thing we did was, in addition to talking to the neighbors out loud, we sent a survey organized with our property management company. I compiled a number of questions regarding interest and sent it out to all the owners, gave it about a 2-week turnaround time. And fortunately, the results were an overwhelming response. I think we probably had about a 50% response rate, and 90% were in support of installing chargers. It was very promising. So once you have that data, that's your leverage to work with your HOA. The blocker is certainly the cost. However, I learned from my investigating and sending inquiries to Virginia Dominion Power that they just started a program this summer, and this is a short and sweet summary of it. Ultimately, they will subsidize 50% of the installation cost of electric vehicle chargers, and for the remaining 50%, you can subsidize it, you can pay it over a 10-year period at like 1.5% interest. So you don't have to require another assessment for a special project. It's really a de minimis cost for something that's a great benefit to the owners of the community. I'm really excited about it. And when I learned about this program, I thought that kind of eliminates all the barriers. The only thing we need to do now is find a location. So once you've got your data, you've engaged your team, you've gotten approvals, you can kick off your project by identifying the location for your chargers. You can contact Dominion Power. They can come and help you assess the right location and a site. They'll provide an estimate for the installation, the timeline, the costs. And try engaging a neighbor who is also a project manager. That's ideal. But honestly, a lot of the project, the heavy lifting is done in the planning. So I would definitely recommend you get involved. I believe that the information regarding the Virginia Dominion Power subsidy for EV chargers will be shared after this. And if not, you can reach out to me directly and I'll be happy to share it with you. So very excited. I think there is a lot of potential, a lot of growth, and I think we're at a momentum now where our thought process around electric vehicles is really shifting in a broader way, and I'm really excited. The future is now. So happy to see you guys all here. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Joy, for that. I really loved hearing about your passion for EVs. I feel like just the fun of driving them is something that we don't always hear about. So I really appreciate that perspective. And then our final speaker for the night before we switch to our Q&A is Justin Wilt, who will kind of speak from the single-family homeowner perspective and has some very cool slides to go through. So take it off, Justin.
Thank you. And Joy and Ron are both correct, as anyone else who might mention it too. They are fun to drive. When I first sat in the car that I ended up purchasing and tapped the accelerator, boom, smile, instant. And it's not like I was screaming down the street, but that instant on feeling is just so comforting. And so it's just, you got to try it to understand it. You may have experienced it in a golf cart in a very, very low degree. And in a standard EV, it's a whole lot different. And so you definitely want to try it. Something else that happens also with EVs and hadn't been addressed is they are quiet inside. And so that provides a sense of serenity. If someone's doing any kind of commuting, it's probably like the coolest place you can be for any kind of hectic commute because it's just so chill in there. And it's just a very comfortable environment. People I've taken in my car of all stripes have all commented on that, and they find it just to be a super positive. So that's just kind of a nice little extra there. Click to the next slide, please. I got my car a number of years ago. I got it in October 2019, and it was a pre-owned vehicle at the time. At that point, and unfortunately it's not true anymore, because EVs were still a bit of a novelty and not as well understood, pre-owned EVs were a bargain. So I got mine in fabulous condition for a song and figured that's a great way to get in, right? It's an entry drug, if you will. And I figured, let's give this a try and see how it goes. And then we'll keep going as things turn out. This car is basically a Mark 7 Golf. It's a standard, 2016 VW Golf that has an electrical powertrain and all the other goodies along with it, but it's basically the exact same car. So that's a little bit different than a lot of EVs that are more purpose-built, more unique. And it's a little bit of a stealth machine in that respect as well, which it can be kind of entertaining because no one understands it's an EV until I explain it to them, and then they get smiles on their faces. But it's been a ton of fun, still does a lot of great duty. And if you're a hatchback fan, it's the way to go. Next slide, please. I'm lucky enough to live in a single family home, albeit one that doesn't have a driveway, but I can, plug in and take care of business overnight. And that makes life so much easier. Even just using the level 1 charger, which has the sort of the slower refill speed that Ron spoke to. If I'm down a bunch of range, I can plug it in at night, and then by the morning, I should be in great shape. As both Ron and Joy mentioned, the biggest paradigm shift here is planning ahead. Be cognizant of, at the end of the day, when you park or whenever you've done driving around, how much range do you have? What do you forecast to be your needs for the next day? What do you need to do to get there? For me and my experience driving around DC, Arlington, whatever, the vast majority of time plugging it in overnight is more than enough. From time to time, if you do need to do a fast charge, the car does have that capability to use a level 3 charger. And in Arlington, we do have a fairly good distribution of those around. So, I'll talk a little bit about later sort of the approach to that. But there's lots of options out there if you just sort of think about it and plan ahead accordingly. Currently, I'm lucky that basically charging my car is free. unless we have an extended cloudy time. We have a solar array, an 8.2 kilowatt solar array on the top of the house. And so basically all of the power needs to charge the car when it's plugged in at home have been provided by that big ball of fire up in the sky. Prior to the installation of the solar array, when we're just drawing from the grid, on average, we were trying to recall, and I think you'd see maybe a bump in the overall electric bill month to month of about $10 to $25. And that would vary a fair amount, but again, we didn't track it super tight. So either way, the lift has not been huge to pay, to cover the cost for it, but getting it for free from Mother Nature certainly helps as well. Because this vehicle was in essence VW's first gen version of an EV, they've gone on to more evolved vehicles now, and yet better ones are coming down the road. This was them sort of figuring out how to do an EV, and so the range was not huge. Out of the box, fully charged, the range is supposed to be about 83 miles, which is just laughable by current standards. But back in the day, 2016, that was sort of par for the course. What that means in real world driving is you have to pay attention, how far you're going to go and make sure that you can fill up when the opportunities arise. So rather than waiting until the low fuel light comes on, as you might do in a combustion engine car, think a little bit ahead, plan ahead, and see what you need to do. And everything tends to be pretty good then. The term typically that you might hear is range anxiety, which is, gee, do I have enough juice to get from point A to point B? Most of your daily driving, unless you drive to Philadelphia every day or something, is going to be well within the range of most current EVs, no matter what you have in the way of errands and stuff like that. So generally, range anxiety is not as much of a concern at this point. Back in the day, a different story. Next slide, please. So we've talked about planning a little bit. Part of that, what you need to consider are things like the weather, the geography or topography, and then basically the speed, what kind of driving you're going to be doing, because all of those have a factor on how much of your power gets drawn down. Typically, batteries operate a little less efficiently in colder weather than in warmer weather. So for my car, if I fill it completely, the range actually will show sometimes almost 90 on a nice warm day. Whereas if I fill it up to the brim on a 32 degree day, 32 degree Fahrenheit day, maybe I'll get 60 miles, maybe not. So you will see some variation there. As you're driving, obviously, if the car has to work harder, it's going to use up more energy. Are you going up a lot of hills? Are you going fast? If you're driving around the Beltway, it's very different than if you're going from here to anywhere here locally in Arlington. Likewise, and this speaks to the regenerative braking benefits, are you going nonstop like on a highway, or are you in city driving? If you're doing stop and go driving in the city, yes, that's plenty of opportunities for the brakes to kick in, give you a little bit of power back that really stretches out the range that you've got. The last office job I have, I live in Claremont, which is near Wakefield High School, South Arlington. Last job I had was in Tenleytown up in DC. So if you're familiar with the geography or the topography a little bit, Tenleytown is basically the highest point, more or less, of Washington, D.C., and it's a long, slow downhill between Tenleytown and Key Bridge to get into Arlington. It's amazing how little power I would use on that drive home. Now, correspondingly, on the way to work in the morning, you use it up as well, but you have to keep that in mind when you're thinking about what range you have and how far you have to go, how often you might need to refuel, things like that. What you need to end up doing then is think about just, am I doing something where there's an opportunity to charge? Can I charge at work? Can I charge at home? Are there other things that I do that provide good charging opportunities? And so if you'll click to the next slide, please. one of the ideas is think about what else you can do that makes charging, particularly a fast charge, not a time suck, but a benefit to you. This is sort of the going back to the whole plan ahead mantra. At one point, I had a work routine that had me doing some fast charging pretty routinely on weekends just to keep up with a variety of different activities. And guess what? Fast chargers tend to be near grocery stores or coffee shops or other places where, you know what, you might want to pop in and spend 5 or 10 or 15 minutes or more if you need to, so that you're not just sitting in your car charging, waiting for that to happen. Instead, you're doing something that either you need to do or that's fun during the course of your day. And then at the end of it, yay, your car is in good shape and you're ready to go again. So you plan ahead, you put in maybe a couple of points in your day where you're going to do something a little bit different that is beneficial. And the charging situation ends up being really more of a benefit than a detriment. I personally don't particularly like going to gas stations, sticking the hose in the car and just sitting there for a while, waiting for things to happen and looking at the other people doing the same thing. Charging an EV at most of the fast chargers ends up being a very different proposition. Couple different charging basics. Some of you may understand these, and this is the first one is true for sort of anything that involves rechargeable batteries, very true for cars. Think about using the 80-20 rule. You typically, except in exceptional situations, you don't want to charge it above 80% capacity. You don't want to let it run down below 20% capacity. This is because, with the different technologies of batteries, this varies a little bit, but generally batteries learn from repeated use, and they're happiest in essence and more capable of recharging reliably and frequently if you follow the 80-20 rule. That doesn't mean that if you're drawn down to 5 miles to go or something, you don't jump onto a fast charger and take it back to 100%. You can do that, obviously. Your car's charging software will probably adjust the charging rate, actually. So you'll charge pretty quickly up to probably 80%, and then it'll be slower beyond that. So just recognize that charging is not a linear thing. But you don't want to charge to 100% on a repeated basis. And you certainly don't want to do a fast charge on a repeated basis back to back to back to back, because then you run into some heat buildup issues, and that really can affect the life of your battery. So if you know how to care and feeding for your car, basically, that makes life good. There are a number of different resources you can use to locate charging infrastructure, whether it's fast chargers, standard level 2s. There are even individuals who will let you contact them in some cases and use their home chargers. I've not tried that yet, but I've heard it works. Plugshare.com is commonly used. I know there's ChargeHub. Most of the fast charger service companies like Electrify America, EVgo, whatever, have their own websites with listings for their services as well. The first ones I mentioned aggregate all the different information. And so take advantage of those. You can use those to route plan. You can use those just to become familiar with what's available in your area. If you look, say, on PlugShare and you filter out everything but level 3 chargers, it's actually quite reassuring how often you can find level 3 chargers throughout Northern Virginia and in various parts of DC as well and beyond. So it's definitely nice to have those as backups. You can even see real-time status of those chargers, because yes, it does suck to show up to a charger that you've been counting on charging at, only to find that someone's there ahead of you. But on PlugShare, at least, and maybe some of the other services, you can look, and at the point that you're looking, it'll tell you if there are 6 stations, how many of those are in use and what's available and is anything offline and all that kind of stuff. So that can be very, very reassuring, as long as you recognize that the situation could change between the time you look online and the time you actually get to that charger. Regular search engines work too. My daughter, despite the fact I told her about all these great tools, she just basically whips her phone out and looks up fast EV chargers near me. And you know what? the Google helps. It'll tell you this kind of stuff as well. Maybe not in the same level of detail, but it also works. So there are lots of different mechanisms you can use, whether you're planning ahead or even at the last minute, to find out ways to make sure that you're going to be able to refuel your car. Next slide, please. That's just a couple of screenshots, one of Charge Hub, one of PlugShare, that show all the different chargers. Again, you can filter them in different ways, so you see all the different networks, all the different levels that are available. They can show you ones that are out of service as well as in service if you wish. It's interesting to fine tune it and really see how many of these things are around. And it should be a great comfort to anyone who's not sort of familiar with this. The one, a quibble I do have right now with the EV charging infrastructure compared to people's understood experience with gas stations is there aren't common formats, if you will. And so finding the chargers can be difficult the first time around. Sometimes you'll see several chargers which look like obelisks standing in a field. In some cases, you might see them just sitting at a corner of a parking lot. In some cases, you have to go into a parking garage and know where in the parking garage to look in order to find these charges. The signage differs from facility to facility. Some places have them, some places don't. So if you're doing some research, looking this stuff up ahead of time, I know certainly on PlugShare, usually when you click onto the description of its specific location, you can find pretty detailed information about how to find that specific charging station, including photos of where they are. And anything that can help you allay any concern or make it easier to find this stuff is beneficial. Give that a try. It's been very, very helpful at times. Hopefully the signage will become a bit more uniform over time and they'll figure that out, but that's on down the road. Sorry, next slide. So as I mentioned, charging lets you multitask. Away from home charging is not a chore. How many times have I got what I needed to get at the grocery when I should have remembered it earlier, but now I have got another chance to go and do it. So I'll go ahead and grab it. Again, you can grab a coffee, you can shop for an e-bike, you can go visit a friend, depending upon the location. There's a whole lot of stuff you can do, and that's going to increase over time. I believe some of the companies, the larger charging network companies, are actively developing something closer to the gas station model that we have currently, where you have charging stations and amenities co-located in the same place. It might be a little coffee shop, convenience store, whatever. You'll also find them near libraries, public plazas, so all sorts of different things you can do that. But the basic idea is that it's a positive. You can be productive, you can have fun, just enjoy it. Next slide, please. The folks wanted me to talk about electric bikes as well, so let's go ahead and do that. This actually is my wife's e-bike, and depending upon how you count it, e-bikes are probably you've seen more e-bike sales lately in terms of units than you have electric vehicles in the past number of years, and it's in the US at least. So there's been a bit of an e-bike explosion. And again, just like with the EV car, try one and you'll understand why. In this case, my wife has a Specialized Turbo Vado. It's got a max range of maybe 50 miles, depending upon the setting and the speed you go, all that kind of stuff. Generally, e-bikes have 3 to 5 different power settings. That's the degree of augmentation that they put in. But you typically do have to pedal as well as allow the bike to assist you with it. In this case, the bike has a removable battery, and you can just take it inside, plug it into a standard household socket. Life is good. Click on to the next one, please. She got the bike initially because she was commuting to work using her regular bike, and some days that just wasn't good, or it's a bit of a challenge. for anyone who has commuted by bike, there's myriad benefits to it, but sometimes you do end up a little bit sweatier at work, and you do have to focus on your route planning to make sure that, are you avoiding the worst hills? Are you in a safe area? All this kind of stuff. With an e-bike, it's actually easier to do your route planning because you have a lot more in the way of options. You have a greater ability to cover a large amount of ground in a certain amount of time. You can also go at a higher rate of speed. So if you want to be on a road sharing space with cars, you're probably going to feel a lot more comfortable. If you've got some big hills that otherwise keep you from going a certain route, so maybe you have to go longer on a regular bike to get around that hill, you can knock that hill out and not have any problem with it. And again, you can show up at work or wherever you're going anywhere from a little less sweaty to not sweaty at all, and ready for the day, ready to enjoy things one way or another. Something that people don't necessarily count on is that, and it becomes problematic for people once you think about trying it. If you've ever tried to park, in Clarendon, say on a busy weekend night, it can be easier and cheaper to park an e-bike in many urban areas than a car. And that's going to be more and more the case over time as more and more bike parking is made available and as cities or communities ramp up the cost of car parking over time. In addition, one of the things I love about my EV is, quite frankly, I don't feel that guilty about jumping in to go run errands or something, because I know environmentally it's a lot less harmful to the world than a conventional car. Same thing with an e-bike. It's perfect for errands within whatever range is comfortable to you. A lot of people say 5 miles or less, and 5 miles for Arlington gets you a lot of stuff. So you can cover a lot of ground within 5 miles. You can replace car trips. Again, parking can be easier. The amount of time you spend is, negligibly different or maybe the same, depending upon where you're trying to go and that kind of stuff. You can carry an interesting amount of stuff on a bike. And if you've seen some people with the heavy duty cargo bikes, you'll certainly understand how that works out. But just like with the EV car, it's also fun. Presumably most of you learned to ride a bike at some point in your life. It's one of those things that, man, it never ceases to be fun. I mean, maybe it's not for everyone, but I would urge people to give it a try. For those of you who know the large hill, Superman Hill, which is a big hill on Walter Reed Drive in South Arlington, looks scary, is scary. You have not lived until you blast your way up that hill on an e-bike and then tell your friends about it later. So there's a lot of practical good. There's a lot of emotional benefit that can come from it. And again, it's a simple plug-in solution that works at home, works at work. And would love it if anyone would be interested in trying that out. Because if you can replace your car with a bike, that's not a bad thing either. Next slide, please. That would be it.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Justin, Joy, and Ron. At this time, we will move into our Q&A session. My name is Jenna Peabody, and I'm a member of the AIR team, and I'll be moderating the Q&A session. So if all panelists could turn their videos back on, and if any audience members have any questions, please ask them in the Q&A feature on your team's dashboard if you have not already done so. All right, so that was a fantastic panel. Thank you all for speaking. And we can get started with the questions. So there were multiple topics that the audience was interested in. One of them, one of the largest questions was around installation and types of chargers. So I just wanted to begin with, which charger is the best to install. If you're looking to buy a hybrid or an electric, but you're waiting for a universal plug, do you need a speed charger, or is the basic charger enough for a 2-car home? Do you install the charger inside, outside the garage? And do you need the charger before buying a car? If Ron, I know you had mentioned a few things, if you wanted to begin with that, and then I think Justin, if you wanted to answer as well.
Sure, I'll start with that one. So a lot of questions, a lot of parts of that question. I got my first EV in 2012, and we actually decided got a great deal, and so we actually got it before we got a charger. And so we actually lived with using a 110 outlet in our garage for about 8 weeks without having a charger, and that was fine. It wasn't going to be a good long-term solution. But then we got a charger installed, and it was what's I referred to in my other slides as that level 2 charger, basically on a dryer circuit. But it was on the slow end of what would be considered today's level 2 chargers. The car gets around 25 to 27 miles of range per hour, which is fine. We now have, that car was leased and is gone. We now have 2 EVs that both get more than 3 times the range of our original one, and we still have the same charger we bought in 2012. So one of the things that I wanted to mention is, now this is very different if you have a charger at home versus if you're in an apartment or condo, but if you have access to a charger where you park, you're not necessarily needing to charge every day. So my wife and I, like I said, we have 2 EVs. One of them is that a carbon copy of Joy's Tesla Model 3, just different wheels. And the other one is a Chevy Bolt. And we will plug them in basically when we need to. The rule of thumb is if the car gets below 100 miles, we usually plug it in, or if the next day we're going on some longer distance where we need to. But even with 2 EVs, we still get by with just one charger. As far as inside or outside, that really depends on your situation. These units, for the most part, can be installed outdoors. It might seem a little scary, but at a public charger, I plugged it in the rain and it's not a problem. So you can do them outside. It's just going to change maybe some of the wiring, and the electrician will know that. Upgrading your electrical box is going to vary depending upon what you have. You may not have enough capacity. You may want to think about, if you know what kind of car you're looking for or want to future-proof things. The standard chargers you see, a lot of them are a 30 amp charger, which is going to require a 40 amp circuit. You always have to have a buffer. For if you're doing a new installation, I'd recommend getting actually a 48 amp charger. Because most newer cars plus future cars are going to be able to take faster speeds. That's going to require 60 amps. So it just depends on how much room is in your panel and how much you want to spend there. So that's going to vary a lot. As far as brands go, there are a lot of brands out there, and there are chargers that are relatively basic. You plug it in and that's all it does. There are ones that have an app for your smartphone and you can monitor it and control it remotely and do all kinds of fancy things. That depends if you want those kind of extra bells and whistles. That's really a personal preference thing. So I hope I covered most of was part of that question.
Yeah,
Right.
I think you did. If Justin, you wanted to add on to that.
I guess a bit of a tangent. It's something that I would like to see explored in the area for people who have home chargers or want to have home chargers. And that is the notion of sort of a little bit of what Joy said, of having a pedestal charger that one can have next to a parking spot. Not all Arlingtonians have garages. Not all Arlingtonians have driveways. If one does, that makes the placement of a charger a lot easier. But if you're just parking on the street, well, then what happens? And it's interesting. I think it was put together in Berkeley, California, if I remember correctly. But there's a framework that's used at Berkeley, and I think Philadelphia, Pennsylvania uses the same one, and New Orleans, Louisiana, for 3 different places uses the same thing, that allows homeowners to install pedestal chargers with the cooperation of, I'm guessing it's the state or local utility. And obviously there's permits and there's a process to go through. But the net effect is you've got people who then, park always on the street, but have access to a charging system that's robust, and it's usually level 2 chargers in those cases. So I would be excited to see if Arlington could get to something like that at some point to help bridge the gap a little bit. But beyond that, I think everything Ron said was on point.
Which is also, keeps in mind the multifamily, so condo buildings and apartments. Joy, I know you had mentioned some steps to take, but what the audience wanted to know was the expectation for EV charging. So will people charge at home? How many charges are needed? I know you had mentioned some surveys to take, but what are your suggestions for how to decide how many charges are needed?
Yeah, so it's data driven, right? So how many, what the questions that we asked in the survey were not only do you support the installation of EV community chargers, it's do you have a chargeable vehicle now, or do you anticipate or desire to have one in the near future, in the next year, 2 years, 3 years? So there were a lot of people who were like, I think so, I'm not sure, definitely yes. And very few, a handful, plenty of people were like, no, definitely not. But enough people supported the data to say, okay, there's clearly an interest here. We're living in 2023, where the future is now. There are EV chargers of all types all over the place. And so there are people, this is, it's just another amenity, with our wonderful pool and our reserved parking spaces and fill in the blanks. But this makes, it adds value to the multifamily community. And it's an amenity that people are already pursuing. They have, I think, the Fairlington Villages, which is the largest association within overall Fairlington, installed theirs, I think, 5 years ago, and at the main community center near the Abingdon Elementary School. And so now there are 3 others that have popped up. And so it's just, you can't really stop progress, right? And people are very interested in it. But again, being able to shift your lifestyle a little bit, because you can't just hop over to the gas station, which is, there are several across the street. You have to really be thinking about it. But having the data, having the support of the community really drives the decision. And we're, I think, going to aim to install 4 chargers, so 2 pedestal chargers that have 2 ports, so we can charge 4, have 4 chargers available, which is honestly what a lot of the shopping center garages have in them. Harris Teeter, I think, has 2. The Guapos garage behind in Shirlington has 2. I call it the Guapos garage. It's like the epicenter. So people are interested, but the data, and honestly, the Virginia Dominion incentive is also a huge driver, pun intended. So.
Oh, that's excellent.
Yeah.
I want to try to fit in one more question before we wrap up, but I
have one
saw,
quick
yep.
for people that are in a condo. One thing to think about is how much you drive. And I always recommend folks to keep a diary of your driving habits, how far you drive and how often you drive distances. And Joy mentioned just going over to the gas station. Well, if you live in an apartment and work and all your stuff is close by, you may only drive 200 miles in a week or 10 days. And that would be the equivalent of finding a fast charger someplace nearby where you do stuff and going there once every so often. So it wouldn't be that much different than going to the gas station. You just gotta plan a little bit. So I encourage everybody to keep a diary of how you drive and where you go. And you may find that it's not as a little bit of planning and a little bit of just getting used to change. It's not as hard as it thinks without having some data.
I think that's an excellent suggestion. And I guess lastly, one of the larger questions were around storage and solar. So Justin, I know you had mentioned in your presentation the benefits that you're getting because of the solar power. Could you talk a little bit more, maybe just answer, who should, who would be able to do this, and how does it connect with solar and storage?
I mean, when I get rich and famous, I'll probably splurge and get a battery storage system for the solar system as well, but I haven't gotten there quite yet. But that would sort of be the creme de la creme. If you've got a solar system on your house, or even if your condo association has them, locally, on their buildings, as long as the system is then feeding your electrical system with juice, life is good. And you can derive the benefits whether you're charging your car or running your dryer, whatever you're going to be doing. So it's just sort of the happy-go-lucky thing that makes life good. I have seen situations where people create unique or separate solar systems, like a solar covered carport, where that system is dedicated just to recharging the car. I don't know much about the mechanicals or the electrical system related to that, but it is done. But with respect to a home solar system, it's all pretty tied in together, and it's all pretty simple. So it makes it very, very easy.
Yeah, just to add that to that a little bit, when you're getting solar, I have solar as well, and the electrons from the solar system don't necessarily go directly into the car. So electricity is kind of like if we were all in a room and had to all put a $5 bill on the table, we could all pull one out, and it wouldn't matter which one we got, it's still $5. Well, electricity is kind of the same thing. No matter where it's coming from, electrons are all the same. So when you're getting solar off your house, if you are using it when you generate it, it's powering your refrigerator, charging your car, whatever. And if you don't have enough, you're pulling from the grid. If you have too much, if you have more than you're using, it goes back to the grid. And so while solar works out in the end, you're kind of like trading electrons around. And so like with Justin, we're driving on sunshine, I like to say, and there's no net cost for the fuel. It really doesn't matter, where, when it happens and where it happens. It's all about just the flow out to the grid or not. So.
Yeah. Well, those are, great responses. There are more questions, but we have reached the end of the time for the Q&A session. Thank you, panelists, for your responses. We're super grateful for your expert insight into residential EVs. And thank you to the audience members for joining us today and for your fantastic questions. If we did not get to your question, we will plan to follow up via email for those responses, as well as additional EV resources. Lastly, we invite you all to join us for our next webinar on the town commercial EV charging, which is on October 30th at 12 p.m. to 1 p.m. You can learn more and register on our AIR event page, and we hope to see you there. This concludes our at-home residential EVs webinar.